Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to be talking about ball pythons, and specifically we're going to be talking about some things that I think you should know before you actually decide to get a ball python. I've owned ball pythons for over 6 years now, and a ball python is actually the very first pet snake that I got. This video is not meant to be a full care guide by any means, and it's also not really to say if a ball python is a good pet or a bad pet, because ultimately that's for you to decide. This is just some information that I think is important to consider before you make the decision to get a ball python, and some things that I wish that I knew before I brought my ball pythons home. Ball pythons often get recommended to people as a great first pet snake, and to be completely honest, I kind of disagree with this. I personally believe that there are some other snakes out there that make better beginner snakes, but that's not to say that ball pythons are bad or that you can't own one as your first pet. If that's what you really want, then absolutely, by all means, go for it. Let's just talk about a few things that I think are useful to know before committing to that ball python. Something that I think is important to know, and something that I really wish I had a better understanding of before I got my first ball python, was that ball pythons can be really finicky eaters. Some of them are going to have amazing appetites and they're never going to be picky, but it is actually really common for ball pythons to refuse meals and to be picky about the food that they're being fed. When I got a ball python as my first pet snake, I actually got really stressed out at one point and really worried because weeks had gone by and I could not get my snake to eat. Every time I offered him food, he just refused it. He was not interested in it, and it was really starting to stress me out. I didn't know at the time that this was common, and I was getting really worried that I was doing something completely wrong, and I was scared that I was going to end up harming my snake because he wasn't eating. So if you're considering getting a ball python, be prepared that they might be picky about their food. Now, if your snake is being picky about their food, there is usually a reason for this, and there is usually ways that you can fix the problem. Sometimes a ball python is not going to eat if they feel stressed out. If their habitat is not set up properly, maybe they feel too exposed, maybe they're feeling shy, they don't have enough hiding spots, this might cause them not to eat because they feel vulnerable. Maybe their temperatures or their humidity aren't right. If your enclosure is not warm enough for the ball python, it's also likely that they're not going to eat because they need that heat in order to digest their food properly. Now, this is just from my personal experience, but I've found that more often than not, it has to do with their setup. A lot of times, once a person changes their setup, maybe they give them more hiding spots, they make the snake feel more secure, they give them a warmer temperature. A lot of time that solves the issue, but not always. Sometimes they're picky about whether or not they'll eat frozen prey or if they're only going to eat live prey. And sometimes they do just go on hunger strikes for no apparent reason. That is something that happens, particularly in the winter time. It's not uncommon for a ball python to go off of food for a couple weeks or even a couple months during the colder months of the year. Now, keep in mind that this is not exclusive to ball pythons. It is possible for any snake of any species to be a picky eater. So no matter what type of snake you're getting, this is something that you might end up dealing with, but it is especially common in ball pythons, and it is something that can stress out a lot of first-time ball python keepers. So if you're thinking of getting a ball python, just be aware that this is a problem that you might run into and something that you might have to spend a bit of time figuring out. If this does happen to you, just know that it does not mean you're a terrible owner, and you do not have to panic or freak out. You will probably be able to fix this issue as long as you're willing to change things up and experiment around with your care and be willing to accept advice when advice is given. Another thing that I believe is important for new ball python keepers to know is that there is a lot of conflicting information out there about ball pythons and how to care for them. Ball pythons are a very common pet reptile. In fact, I'm pretty sure they're like the most common pet reptile in North America. And because they're so common as pets, there are a lot of people who have experience with them, and as a result, there are a lot of people who have different opinions and sometimes conflicting opinions. If you are researching how to care for a ball python, you're probably going to see a lot of different things. On one end of the spectrum, you might see people talking about how ball pythons do best when they're cared for in small setups. They don't like a lot of space. The space can stress them out. They don't move a whole lot, so keeping them in a small setup with minimal enrichment is best for them. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you'll have people who talk about how a ball python needs a lot of space because they're a pretty decent sized snake. These people might say that they need a 6-foot long enclosure and they need full spectrum lighting with things to climb on, things to explore, things to hide in, things to soak in. They do good in bioactive setups. When you consider these two ends of the spectrum, there's a lot of conflicting information out there, and people can be really passionate about what they believe in. The people on one end of the spectrum are probably really passionate that this is the way to do it, and the people on the other end of the spectrum are really passionate that this is the way to do it. So if you're considering getting a ball python, know that you're probably going to get a lot of mixed advice depending on who you're talking to or what you're researching. Like I said at the beginning, this is not a care video, so I'm not here to say what is right and what is wrong. If I'm being completely honest, I do believe that there are multiple different ways that you can care for an animal, and I also believe that every individual animal is different, and some might do better on this end of the spectrum while others do better down here. So my advice to someone who wants to get a ball python is to just research as much as you possibly can. Look at all of the different resources, read a bunch of different care guides, watch a bunch of different videos, talk to different owners, to breeders, get as much information as you possibly can, and consider that information and do what you believe is going to be best for you and best for your animal. And going even further than that, once you have the animal, continue to observe that animal and make adjustments if you need to. Maybe you get that animal and then you decide they need a bigger enclosure, or you get that animal and you decide that maybe they need a smaller enclosure. When it comes to owning ball pythons and any animal in general, I think it's just really important to listen to what your animal is telling you. Of course, they can't speak, but just do what you believe is best for your animal and what is going to result in them being happy and healthy. Another thing that I wish I was a little bit more prepared for when I got my first ball python was being aware of their humidity requirements and knowing that a ball python needs higher humidity than a lot of other pet snakes out there. Going all the way back to 2017 when I got my first ball python and he was stressing me out because he wasn't eating. He also stressed me out because the first time he shed his skin with me, it was a disaster. His very first shed in my care was just horrible. Ideally, when your snake has the proper humidity levels and the proper care, they're going to shed their skin all in one piece. Now, sometimes this will rip and tear and stuff, and you might see more than one piece. That's still fine, that's normal, but what you don't want is it to just be an explosion of little flakes of skin here and there, and you don't want it to be stuck on the snake after they have shed, and this is exactly what happened with my ball python Titan. He had his first shed, and it was just like confetti everywhere. Pieces were still stuck to him, and I felt horrible. I felt like I was failing him. I felt like I was doing everything wrong. I was already stressed about him not eating, and now I was stressed about this horrible shed that he had. So honestly, my whole first month owning this snake, it did nothing but stress me out. After this, after he had this really bad shed with me, I actually decided to completely change his care. Originally, I was keeping him in a glass tank, and after this, I decided to move him into a bin enclosure. So if you are considering getting a ball python, be aware that they do have higher humidity requirements than other snakes like corn snakes or king snakes, for example. So if you think that you will struggle to maintain a high humidity level, or if you think it might really stress you out if your snake has a bad shed, maybe consider another species of snake that doesn't have such a high humidity requirement. If you get a ball python python and it does have a bad shed, that does not make you a bad owner, does not make you a horrible person, as long as you're willing to look into the issue and fix it. Maybe your snake had a really bad shed the first time, so you decided to change something and now they have a good shed. That's what happened with me. That's what happened with Titan. I promise you, even though he had a really bad shed with me the first month I had him, he's still living a happy and healthy life now, and he no longer has bad sheds. Now let's talk about ball python morphs. This is a topic that has known to be fairly controversial in the reptile community. It is a topic that I, of course, have my own opinions on, but again, that is not what this video is for. This is not a care video. This is not a video about my personal opinions, but I do want to talk about morphs because this is something that is important for people to know before they get a ball python. Ball pythons come in hundreds and thousands of different morphs. You can get ball pythons in like every color and every pattern imaginable. It is insane how many ball python morphs are out there. Now, depending on what morph you get, that's also going to affect the price tag of your snake. So if you're wanting to get a pet ball python and you're on a lower budget, there are still a lot of different morphs that suit that lower budget. Or maybe you have a higher budget and you want to look into some of the more higher end morphs. I promise you there is something out there for everyone. Now, no matter what morph you get of ball python, their care is pretty much always going to be the same. No matter what color and pattern your ball python has, it is the same species, they have the same temperature and humidity requirements. It's not going to really change anything about how you care for that snake, but there is a possible exception to that rule. When it comes to ball python morphs, there are some morphs out there that are known to cause specific issues with the snake. The most famous morph and issue combination is going to be that of the spider gene. Now, the spider gene is something that causes ball pythons to have a very different looking pattern than they normally would. And for whatever reason, this gene also causes the animal to have certain neurologic problems that seem to affect the animal's balance and coordination. Spider morph ball pythons have what people refer to as a wobble. And now again, this mostly means that the snake seems very uncoordinated at times. Sometimes you'll see them go upside down, they kind of roll around a little bit. Often this is the most visible when the ball python is eating or about to eat. If you have a snake that has these neurologic problems and they go to strike at their rat, they might miss because their coordination is off. Now, personally, I'm not a big fan of morphs that come with problems like these, but again, that is your decision to make. So if you are looking at getting a ball python and you know that you want a certain morph, research that morph, see if it comes with any problems, and then decide for yourself, is that something that you're okay with supporting, and are those problems something that you feel confident you can take care of? For a first-time snake owner and a first-time ball python owner, I would recommend staying clear of them, because if you have a snake that has neurologic problems, it's going to add an extra challenge to their care. So for a first-time snake owner, it's probably not the best decision, but again, that is your decision to make. Before you decide to commit to a ball python, also consider the fact that these snakes have very long lifespans. Ball pythons in captivity often live anywhere from 20 to 30 years, and there are even exceptions that have lived even longer than that. There are ball pythons that have made it to their 40s and very few that have even made it into their 50s. So understand that if you decide to get a pet ball python, that is a very long commitment. So if you're young, if you're still in school and you don't really know where your life is going yet and you don't have much of a plan figured out, you might want to reconsider if this is a good pet for you. Again, I'm not saying that you can't get one, it's just something to think about. You're going to have to plan for this snake for a very long time. Now, the very last thing that I have to say to someone who is considering getting a ball python for a pet is to just know that there are oftentimes ball pythons that are up for adoption or ball pythons that are in need of homes. As I've mentioned, ball pythons are really common pet snakes. So since ball pythons are such a common pet, oftentimes they do end up being rehomed or they end up being put up for adoption. So if you've done all of your research and you've decided that a ball python is still the pet that you want, maybe consider looking for one that is in need of a new home. Now, I'm not saying you have to go this route. If you want to buy a ball python, maybe you want a specific morph, it is perfectly okay to go to a responsible breeder, but just know that you also can find ball pythons that are being adopted and are in need of new homes. A lot of people prefer to go the rescue route because you're giving a home to an animal in need, and that is very possible with ball pythons. Plus, if you do get one that is being adopted out rather than purchasing a brand new one, the person who is rehoming that animal or the person who's adopting it out can probably give you a lot of information about what that snake likes, if they're a picky eater, if they've had problems in the past. You might be able to get a little bit more information about an older snake being adopted versus a baby snake that's being sold by a breeder or a pet store. This is also a good route to consider if you're nervous about their really long lifespan. Maybe you want a ball python, but you don't want a 20 or 30 year commitment, so if you go the adoption route, maybe you can find an older ball python that still needs a loving home, but isn't going to be as long as a commitment. So if you're someone who's been considering a ball python, which I assume you probably are if you're watching this video, I hope that you found this helpful in some way. Again, this is not a full care video, and it also couldn't cover every single piece of advice I'd have for a new ball python owner, but hopefully it did give you some things to think about, and hopefully it gave you some insight into what owning a ball python might be like. If you enjoyed this video or if you found it useful, I would really appreciate it if you gave it a big thumbs up. It really helps me out, and also please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. You can also check out all of my other social medias. I will leave them down in the description below. With all that said, I'm gonna say goodbye now, so thank you all so much for watching this video, and I will see you all next time.